this video, I want to talk about the origins of World War I and some of the early developments. You're also reading documents in this period, and we'll be having some discussions as well. So this is all the pieces are gonna kind of fit together. I want to talk first then about the move to war. You may remember that at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, there was the creation of the idea of balance of power. If the big 5 states, remember that's the United Kingdom, France, Austria-Hungary, Prussia, and Russia, all kind of work together, you could avoid war. And that was really kind of the aim. But as we move into the early 20th century, some things are changing. So first of all, is the unification of Germany. Germany is much bigger than Prussia was by itself, and Germany is wanting to establish its role in Europe. It's inherited some of that from the fact that Prussia is its major state, but this really does undermine balance of power. What is going to be the role of Germany in the new Europe? Second, we're in the period of imperialism, as we've talked about before. And that means that there's a lot of conflict between the European nations over colonial holdings. Who's going to hold all of India? Who gets what parts of Africa? And so we're seeing wars that are happening. They're not happening in Europe, but they are happening in the colonies, in the imperial holdings by the European powers. Next is the Ottoman Empire. Now, we had a little bit about that earlier. Remember, that's the nation state that it controls much of the Middle East. So the Ottoman Empire is in the modern day Balkans. It's in parts of Greece. It holds all of modern day Turkey, Lebanon, Syria. Remember, so that's really huge state. But in the late 1800s, it is falling apart. And so the European powers are looking at the Ottoman Empire and are competing for who is going to get different pieces. They would all like all of it, but we are having a lot of conflict as well. So the Ottoman Empire is still there. It's going to be there through World War I, but we are going to have different pieces that are controlled by the European powers. For instance, Britain takes Egypt. France takes what becomes Lebanon. Now, in the midst of all of this, then, we get the alliance systems. Now, I've laid them out here in terms of what's going to happen. So instead of kind of having the big 5 negotiating, we're getting these 2 separate systems of alliances. Germany is going to initially ally with Austria-Hungary, and it actually keeps good relations with Russia for a while. But Austria-Hungary and Russia are fighting over the Ottoman Empire, and they begin to dislike, well, they already didn't like each other, but their relationship gets even more strained. And so basically, Russia is going to decide it can't really work with Germany because Germany is working with Austria-Hungary. Sometimes this sounds like a really crazy high school, cliquey problem. Anyways, so we are going to then have Italy decide to join Austria-Hungary and Germany because it thinks that's a good situation for it. And then Russia and France are going to ally together at first. Now, the country that actually hangs out the longest from all of this is Britain. They have tons of international issues they're dealing with. They really don't want to get tied into these systems. But basically, a couple things are going to change. First of all, in the early 20th century, Germany decides that it wants to be the world's major naval power. And that has been a kind of position that's been held by England for ages. And so Germany starts to build better and newer battleships and a larger navy. And that triggers off England doing the same thing, which actually triggers off most of the other powers doing that as well. But for our story right here, the problem is that England begins to see Germany as a threat. But England doesn't necessarily get along with France or Russia very well all the time. And so what's going to happen in the early 20th century is that Britain basically has to negotiate some borders of where some of its colonies are with France. And then it has to do the same thing with Russia. It's especially in modern day Persia, well, not modern day, It was Persia, now it's Iran. The two of them Britain and Russia set up spheres of influence and things. So that basically the big thing is that by 1907, Britain decides that it's in a good enough position with France and with Russia to join and to create the Triple Entente. If you want to keep these straight, you can kind of keep them straight by the fact that Triple Alliance starts with an A alliance, and Austria-Hungary starts with an A. And so if you can keep that, it's also right down the middle of Europe. And then the Triple Entente includes England, if that helps you keep those straight. So just know now that we have two major alliance systems, and that means that if any one of them gets attacked, the others are supposed to come in and help. Now, Russia has another side alliance, and that's with Serbia, and that is a very important alliance too. Another thing that's going to make the move to war easier is the assumptions about the war. So these are what government and military experts are telling people and what they believe. First of all, war is going to be short. On the whole, people look back at the previous wars that have been fought and they say, aha, that's what war will be like. So the Napoleonic Wars were really long and they were difficult and horribly destructive. But those wars that helped to create Germany, the war with Denmark, the war with Austria-Hungary, and the war with France were all relatively short. I mean, just a couple months, and there wasn't that much damage. And also, most of the imperial wars have been pretty short. So when England goes in and defeats the Indian uprising, and so the major European powers and the US, when they come into areas, on the whole, those wars have been very short. So everyone's like, aha, well, with mechanized warfare, with warfare the way it is, it's always just very short, a few months, and then that's the end. There's also the idea that war is offensive. Whichever country moves first wins. You've got to be ready to go because wars are so short, and so you just move and win. Therefore, you better not wait too long to declare war. And one of the most important is it was seen as the easiest way to accomplish the diplomatic aims that people had. This is so, so dangerous. In diplomacy, oftentimes you have to compromise. You don't get everything you want. That's part of the way it works. And it also can be really a long, hard fight in diplomacy. If you think that wars are short, they're just going to be a few months, and hardly anyone's going to die, and you don't really lose anything, then let's trigger a war, because a war means we can accomplish our aims in just a few months, and we get everything we wanted. Who wouldn't want to go to war? This is dangerous, and you can kind of watch it through history. When that attitude starts, usually a war follows. And the other part here was the idea that war is inevitable. The conflicts over the colonies and the imperial holdings, these two systems of alliances, are just going to trigger off a war anyways. And so we should just go and plan. Another aspect is that many governments thought a short little war would make them popular. And for countries who have leaders who are unpopular, this seems like a great option. All of this makes declaring war really easy. So let's talk just very briefly about some of the actual aspects of the war. So remember, it's supposed to be quick and easy and basically no losses. You're just going to get what you want quickly. Now, that very quickly is not the case. And you're watching some videos, some documentaries with war footage from World War I. But I just want to emphasize some pieces. First of all, in these trenches that the soldiers are fighting in, it could not have been a worse time to do this. So here are just some examples. So if we take the early part of the war, from the 25th of October, 1914 to the 10th of March, 1915, there are only 18 days when it did not rain or snow. And 11 of those 18 dry days were below freezing. So you have men who are living in mud trenches, and it is raining all the time. And this is why there's so much disease and sickness. If we take March 1916, it was the heaviest rain in 35 years. I mean, you could not have picked a worse time to be having this type of fighting. And in the winter of 1916, 1917, it was the coldest on record. So the men are freezing to death. Okay, so for instance, the British during the war are going to say that they had 2.6 million battle casualties, men who died in war, but 3.5 million casualties are from disease. So you are much more likely to be affected by that. So I don't want to downplay the battle casualties, but just know a lot of men die because of the conditions that they are in. Another piece I wanted to emphasize is chemical warfare. Now, there are a lot of new weapons that are introduced in new ways in World War I, flamethrowers, tanks, airplanes, but chemical warfare is another horrific aspect of what is going on. In fact, chemical warfare is developed because the idea was this was so horrific that the other side would give up almost immediately. The war is in this period of attrition. Nobody can figure out how to end it, and so let's try chemical weapons. So chemical weapons break down into a few different categories. And the issue here is that through the war, they get more and more horrific. So first of all, when they're first introduced, basically these are tearing agents, tear gas, the stuff that we see just deployed today when there are riots, or maybe you have some in your purse or that kind of thing. And that can cause temporary blindness, and it irritates the nose and the throat. And then we go to the asphyxiants, which are things like chlorine. So this creates hydrochloric acid, when it's in contact with moisture. And of course, if you're in a trench in the rain, that means all exposed skin. It's also your eyes, it's your nasal passages. So you die because of the chlorine that's done. And then we get the blistering agents. These are the absolute worst. This is things like mustard gas. And so what happens is that basically all of exposed skin is going to blister. You also breathe this in and it blisters your lungs. You die that way. These are horrific aspects of World War I, of this war that is going on and on and on. Now, one of the problems then that happens, it actually happens pretty early in the war and continuing through the war, is how is this going to end? Remember, this was supposed to be the quick, fun little war that was going to solve all our diplomatic problems. And as more and more men die, the governments have got to come up with a way to end this war in which they win. I mean, what is going to be the outcome that's going to make all of these deaths justifiable? What is it? You cannot just say, well, whoopsie-doo-dah, we should not have done that. Let's just go back to the way everything was in August of 1914. That's what we need to do. That'll be great. No way. No way will you stay in power if you are a government, because that is just not going to justify this destruction. So as this war continues, it's more and more trying to figure out how to solve it. And the U.S. is advocating an idea of potentially kind of just going back to where things were in 1914, of a just peace. But what a just peace looks like for each country is really different. So just know that people are trying to figure out how to end this war, but mostly how they think will end the war is a decisive victory. And that means as we don't have that, then you just get the new weapons, the war drags on. It seems like there's no end in sight.